Hey, it's been a few weeks. Welcome back. I don't remember how I normally do this, but today we are hanging out with Kfir, who you might know from his contemporary fantasy maps done in traditional methods. I hope that was a good intro, Kfir. How you doing?
That was great. That was fantastic. I'm doing all right. I'm alive.
Uh, since you are a little bit unconventional, right? I think when people think of the fantasy space, they're thinking of you know wizards fighting dragons on paper, things like that. Could you give us a breakdown of your portfolio?
A breakdown of my portfolio. I make fantasy maps, mostly fantasy maps, done using pyrography on traditional buckskin and painted with natural pigments and primitive tools. It's kind of something that happened accidentally. So, um,
So you accidentally
it,
just started taking down deer in the woods and
yeah, it was,
sharpening their bones and using their skins, making
Except
maps out of them.
I have a background. I used to teach primitive skills for about a decade, starting around I want to say 2005, and I started tanning hides, making traditional buckskin for a living. I always pick the things nobody else wants to do, and so I'm also a big nerd and fantasy fan, so Lord of the Rings specifically. And one day I decided to kind of had the inspiration of what would a primitive map of Middle Earth look like. So I made one, and the pyrography entered into it sort of as a last resort. Um, that's certainly not primitive, because I'm using an electric tool that heats up to 5,000 degrees, and I'm not really, but drawing with heat really. And
Right.
so, and I had done some wood burning until that point, and I was actually, the reason I decided to use that is because I was facing a challenge of how the hell do I copy this map. I had a map of Middle Earth, and with a map I really, first of all, I don't consider myself a great artist, but second, with a map I can't just freehand it, because if I change things, then it's no longer that map, right?
Hmm.
It's not a good map anymore. So you can't just take, Mount Doom and put it somewhere else, even if it's an inch away from where it should be. So I was trying to figure out how to copy this map, how to trace this map onto this skin, at least in a rudimentary way. And carbon paper didn't work. Nothing I could think of worked. I certainly couldn't use a light table because the skin is actually, it's
Or
leather, so it's light. It
opaque.
does not. Yeah, it's opaque. Light doesn't show through it. I Some people suggested a projector, but I didn't have anything like that, anything high tech like that. So I had already done some wood burning, and then it occurred to me that I could print out the map in the size that I wanted, put it on the skin, and then burn dots through it in all, and a lot of dots. We're talking thousands of dots
Hmm.
to actually then remove the paper, and then I have kind of a connect the dots game
Right.
of, oh, this is where mountains should be, and this is where the rivers are, and this is, so. And only quite a few years later, I learned that that was actually a legitimate technique that was used. Um, was it was it medieval or Renaissance? I don't remember, but they would like poke holes through like
For
paintings and then rub charcoal through them to have the sort of tracing
parchment,
on this.
you know.
Yeah, when they were replicating, like when you have, your master does the master sketch, and then the apprentices will do all the replicating it by poking holes, throwing some charcoal through it, and then painting over that. So I wasn't cheating that much. And what happened when I used pyrography to do it, when I got all those dots, I figured, well, I might as well just connect the dots with the wood burning tool as well. Otherwise, there'd be all these weird divots in the hide. And when I did that, I realized that skin, when it burns, shrinks and shrivels, and it accidentally created a three-dimensional relief map, and that was cool. So
So like the
it was,
mountains would
yeah,
become
mountains.
bumpy, and
Yeah,
the
exactly.
forests
Rivers would
and
be rivers would be sunken in, and mountains would be bumpy. And I thought this is really cool. It was completely accidental. And so I took that further and further, and and exaggerated that as much as I could over the years, and created some really three-dimensional things. Some of them not maps, but
I
yeah,
imagine people are wanting to see some examples if you have something to show.
Yeah, and if you could shout out your website too.
My website, for as long as that lasts, is cavegeekart.com. And Cave Geek Art anywhere, not Greek, just Cave Geek. I have people do that all the time. Cave Geek Art anywhere. On Instagram, I'm not everywhere. I do have a TikTok and a Blue Sky account that neither has had anything posted to them, or not much. I can show you some older, some newer stuff. There we go. That's an older one, an older map of from Avatar, The Last Airbender. That this was a pain in the butt because every one of these waves in the ocean and this was not a large map. It was fairly small, but yeah, this took hours and hours and hours just to do those individual waves. And you can see the mountains are a little or bumpy, like you said, and all that. But this was not a particularly three-dimensional map. Azeroth, another old one that I did, and I do love to when locations like Azeroth or Middle Earth, when a fantasy world has locations that are iconic and not just gray castles.
Yeah.
Game of Thrones. Then it's then it's fun. Instead of putting a bunch of names on the map, it's fun to just paint them in miniature. So sorry,
so the
it's
people
blurry,
who know what they're looking at.
Exactly. So with Azeroth, I actually had a friend of mine who's been playing Warcraft since, and still plays World of Warcraft. But he's been playing since day one, and he flew his mount to all of these different spots and took screenshots of them so that I would know what they looked like, because I only played it for a very, very short time when it was new. This is a more recent one. This is a couple of years old. Man, 3-4 years old. This is a map of Ansalon from Dragonlance, and this one is a lot more three-dimensional. This was a fun one to do because Dragonlance is my favorite fantasy world. The first fantasy books I ever read, other than The Hobbit, but I read The Hobbit when I was so young. I was 8 years old. I had no idea what a dragon was. So
people probably can't see from your screen there, but there's a lot of Dragonlance books back there behind Kfir.
Yeah, all of these, like that shelf is all like about 60 different Dragonlance novels. So this was fun. A funny little story with that is when I was painting it, I actually brought it with me to GaryCon where I was exhibiting in Wisconsin, and I started painting it at the convention just as something to do at my table, because it's not really a convention like a Comic-Con where you're busy all the time with people coming through.
Right.
And I like to paint mountains first, and I really like to know that I'm painting the right kind of climate and all that, so I like which mountains will have snow on. And to be fair, mountains with snow look a lot better and prettier than mountains without snow.
Right.
On a map, at least. So I came up to Margaret Weiss, who is one of the co-authors of Dragonlance.
Yeah.
Tracy Hickman was not there. And I asked her, I'm like, Margaret, I've got a question for you. I'm painting the map right now in my table, and I need to know what mountains would have snow on it. And her response was, how the hell would I know? Who else would know? you wrote this world into being. So she said, you have my permission to put snow on whatever mountains you want. So that's why most of these mountains have snow, because I'm like, great, this gives me permission, and they look better. So
yeah, although she's the world builder, she's I suppose saying that she's not really a geologist or something along those lines to say that which ones should.
It was one of the first times that I realized, authors don't always care about all those details. Not all authors are Tolkien.
Right.
And even he has things that he just didn't care about. You want to know about languages? Great. You want to know about, Which
Do you
mountains have?
ever I probably talked about this before, where I got my start doing third party illustrations for D&D, for third party products that were,
Right.
and Pathfinder, that was a big thing, 10 whatever years ago, and I think it might still be. But anyway, I learned when I was doing maps for that people can. I was like, oh, I have full freedom here. Turns out people can be just as picky as they are with maps with narrative art. I had a lot of people write to me and say, oh, well, a boreal forest can't actually exist where you put it in this hemisphere on this, and all these other things. Do you ever get a lot of that?
I would say no, because most of the maps I make already exist in people's heads because they're from games or books or movies or things like that. So I'm not making things up, right? I'm not lying. Unless the author tells me, do whatever you want, which then I refuse. I've actually had that happen with an author that I don't know if you guys want me to mention names, but I had an author who was having me make his map for him. Actually, it was a birthday gift for him from his family, and so there was a big open area that was just empty, and I messaged him and asked, like, hey, you've got an opportunity here to like put something here, because the original map in your book just has this empty area. So what do you want to do here? And he goes, you just make up stuff. I don't care. Like, no, this is your world. I'm not making stuff up. Like, because that's what would happen. Fans would come after me when I would, show it to or sell prints or whatever, and fans would come after me for like, what is this? Why did you put it? Like, because the author told me to make stuff up. I'm like, no.
I mean, he gave you his permission. I don't know. Like, I guess if I were in your shoes, I probably would have come up with something. But I do like a lot of that world building.
It's less work to not make stuff up.
That is also true.
That's when you put a river there and you call it River Kfir.
Yeah, you get a river that kind of comes back around and circles on itself just to drive the river people crazy.
Well, you also have a lot of like little iconography and things that you put in, so that's always an option for a blank space. You could do like those medieval cartographers and have like a giant sea serpent popping out or whatever.
I have had some people who think that they're right tell me that something about my maps is wrong. It's really funny. It's happened actually like once or twice with my Middle Earth or Numenor maps, and it's really hilarious because I don't make those maps based on my own research. The person who commissioned me for those specific maps is a Tolkien scholar. And we gather evidence from everywhere, right? Like when I start working on a project, and I think we'll get to that later. We have like 24 different versions of the map, and we pick like which ones are actually correct, and and if there isn't really a in the text from Tolkien himself, in that case, if there isn't really evidence in the text that says this is correct, then we'll make our best educated guesses. But it's really funny when somebody at a convention tries to come up to my booth and look at a map and pretend, and then tell me that I'm wrong. I'm like, okay, fine.
You've done your research, but
yeah, I have had people tell me that my map of Azeroth did not have because expansions came out that added lands to it, various islands or continents, and they tell me that I'm missing that. I'm like, and I just tell them to just keep looking. It's downloading. just keep watching.
Downloading into the buckskin.
Right. Yeah. So no, most of the time I've not had that happen. That's usually not a problem because I try to stick as close as I can and as accurate as I can to what the original is. This one is a very different map. It's the only one I've done of its kind. It's from Breath of the Wild. It was a commission by a big fan, and it's the only sort of top-down topographical map that I've done, and it turned out really well. I was actually surprised. I was very kind of dreading it in the beginning because I'm used to the isometric sort of look where it's easy, and this was difficult to do because there was a lot of circles and random amoeba shapes that I had to connect correctly and then figure out how to turn them three-dimensional, and it ended up working out really well, and so I'm really happy about that, and I would love to do more of those. But haven't had the chance yet. And then there's still some iconography that's, Hyrule City. I know if I get the names wrong, please don't come after me. 'Cause
You're safe with me. I haven't played Zelda ever.
me neither. Oh my God, we are the only two people who have never played a second of Zelda ever.
I've never played Zelda.
Woo! Wow, we are going to
for
get
3.
canceled. We are totally getting canceled on Twitter. Yeah, so that was a really interesting one to do, and I do love doing different things. When I do maps, I also, my approach to doing them is I'd like to think of them as in-world artifacts, not just a piece of art that somebody outside of that world made. So I actually ask, when people commission me, I ask them 3 questions: who made this map in the world, for whom, and what for, right? And why. So, because with maps, you can't just show everything. Then it's physically impossible to show everything on a map. So you have to pick. So finding the reasons for why does this map exist?
Right.
Yeah, what's the purpose of this map?
Deciding
And you have to
how close to omniscient the map maker would be, right? Because
exactly,
we've got so many examples from history of maps that are definitely far from accurate, but that can be a very interesting thing in a map too.
Yeah, and often skewed in favor of the whatever culture created them, as far as trade routes, things like that.
But they still worked, and that's the thing, that even an inaccurate map worked very well for getting you from point A to point B, if that was the purpose of it, or showing you kind of generally which direction your enemies are, things like that. So I do like to ask people to come up with a story for the map, even if it's just a tweet length thing. Just answer those 3 questions as basic as you want to answer them, because that really helps narrow down what's going to be on the map, what style what's it going to look like, or and if people really like, some of my clients, my favorite clients are the ones that'll write me a book. I actually like that, where they will give me so much information and on who made the map for whom and why and all that, and we can come up with so much stuff to go into it. It's great, like little Easter eggs and things like that. So
I always like when people. I've made a ton of maps, and I always like when people. I haven't made maps like you've made maps, right? I've drawn some maps, but I always like when people give me a rough sketch of the map, and then I can. It's sort of almost like building it from their footprint. It's always really fun. I would not do the same thing with illustration, but
So why not?
I don't know.
It's a good question. I mean, why not?
I think people have a general idea of what the map of their world looks like more than what would make a good illustration. Because maps, I don't know. I'm going to get stepped on for this, especially with you on the podcast. But maps don't have to be well composed. We want them to be, and they can be. When you're adding, like in the one we're looking at now, you're clearly working in certain colors and shapes, and groupings of shapes, rather, to make a better design.
Yeah, you're not using the golden ratio in a map.
Right, exactly.
Then they will all look like sparkles.
Yeah. Well, unless you're George R.R. Martin and you're trying to fit your continents into very rectilinear shapes, so you end up with a very vertical continent and a very horizontal continent.
Right, and then it's impossible to actually, or it's not impossible, but it's impractical to actually put both of them on a print, for example, because then a good third of it is just empty ocean
space. Yeah,
that's one thing I got questions with my map of Westeros. Is why don't you have all of Essos? Well, let me tell you, because if I was gonna do it, a third of this would be ocean, and then everything else would have to be much smaller.
Yeah.
So you won't have any detail really.
Yeah, it's in the full world map there, and Westeros basically disappears, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All the important places.
Essos is larger, and nothing happens there. In the story is like only like the coast, and so this is an interesting map. This was a map that started as a joke, and you could cut this whole section out later if you want. But this was a map that started as a joke on my Twitch stream, and then grew into an actual thing.
What's the joke? I don't get it.
Well, look at the shape. Does it seem reminiscent of
I'm
anything?
kidding. That was sarcasm.
But you'd be I was wondering. You got a good poker face. But you'd be surprised. I've had this print, on my table at conventions, and people would come in and they're like, "What world is that from? That looks familiar."
I've seen
And
this view before.
It's funny when it's husbands saying that and wives are looking at them like, "Really? Really?" And it's even funnier when it's a
go
woman.
to find that?
Right. I've had women that look at it like, "What is that?" And it's sometimes, I mean, and there's nothing really dirty about this, right? But sometimes just to encourage people to actually look at things, right? I would put like a sheet of paper on top of it and say adults only, like just people will be like, "Oh, what's under there?" And then
Yeah,
they look at
close
it
you
like,
in.
yeah.
Put them in the right frame of mind.
Yeah, this was a funny thing where basically my Twitch chat came up with all the names. There's Merkin's Woods, and we came up with like lore for this as a whole adventure. Someday I want to publish a D&D module based on this. There's Madame Gina, who's the traveling gypsy woman in her red wagon, of course, and then the Moaning Meadows, and On My Way In, and Driftwood Dunes. This was the River Taint. We didn't name it because there's just no room to put a name on there. But the Backdoor Barrens. There's even a beaver dam over here. Cervix, a monument to Cervix, who died on his journey, this pilgrimage. Gripping, the monument is a fist gripping his sword.
How long did you spend on this?
Oh, way too long.
Just one ballpark hour.
Not long, not as long as some of the other maps you've seen, right? So pretty much, this is a fairly small one, and like you can see, it's not like super painted. Like everything is colored, fully colored. But this is probably around 40 hours of work, 50 hours of work.
It's too much commitment to the.
Yeah, your
to
work
joke.
is very labor intensive, right?
Yeah, so it takes a long time. Just details. This is the Temple of Clitoria. It does take a very long time. Middle Earth. There we go. These are blurry photos. Oh my God, I'm sorry. So this is Middle Earth. And the first map I actually made was Middle Earth. It's not this particular one. The first map I made was Middle Earth, like I mentioned before. And it's the map I've made the most times. I've made it 5 times. And I love it. It's like coming home. So this one was great. This one was commissioned by that guy who's a Tolkien scholar. So when we were making it, and it's what got me started on Twitch, because when he commissioned me, actually at a convention, DragonCon specifically, and he and his wife came to my booth one day dressed as Sam and Rosie, and then they looked at the stuff, and they asked questions about the map of Middle Earth that I had hanging there, my own copy of it. And I was telling them everything. And I will talk, as you can tell. If you ask me questions, I'll keep talking. And so then they came back the next day dressed as Sam and as Han and Leia, and they told me they want to commission me to make them the map for their 37th wedding anniversary. Right? So they're not spring chickens. So then when we were going over the process and back and forth about the commission and all that, and I asked him, how would you like to watch your map being made in real time, and then you could give me feedback live, and that's how I started streaming on Twitch. I do not recommend, like with those clients, it's fine, it was great, but some other clients you don't want to do the art you don't want to take feedback live. I actually have seen that on Twitch with certain streamers who will do their commissions live, and it can be a problem with micromanaging clients. Right, you have to set boundaries on that. I love Middle Earth. All of these locations are iconic. I based them on either the movies or art from decades and decades of art that's out there. So it's my favorite. This is a map that was about 150 hours of work. to make.
Wow.
Between just all the different colors, because they wanted autumn colors in the trees, so that's several more hours just to do that, right? These little details, like this Eye of Sauron right here on the top of Barad-dûr, is less than a grain of rice. All of these, it's blurry to go in that far and see it, but all of these mountains actually have, you can see kind of tiny orange and yellow dots.
Right.
Those are the
They've got
beacons
the
of
beacons.
Gondor.
Yeah.
And there's the specific mountains they're supposed to be on, to the best of our ability, because Tolkien did specify that. So yeah, I love doing those. This is the map, a close-up of the map of Numenor. This is the map itself, and this is far more recent. Same client. This is maybe 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago that I made this one. A lot of story went into this one, and that's why I love this one as an example. It is very three-dimensional, so a lot of these shadows, yes, they are painted in shadows, so half of it is kind of black and gray, and half of it is lighter gray, but your eyes are not deceiving you. The shadows are real as well.
They actually cast it, yeah.
Yeah, when I take photos, I aim the lighting in a way to cast the shadows kind of to overlap any shadows that I painted in. You can see the real shadows right here from the sails. So there's a lot going on in this map. This dedication is in actual brain fart, Elvish. Yep. Tolkien's Elvish, and it's a dedication from Elrond to his brother Elros, who was the first king of Numenor. So
so that was the answer to your question about
who
commissioned,
yeah,
and what for.
And what for? Yeah. So, and it talks about their parents, and these, of course, they're the two trees, and the symbols of their parents, the gull wings and the star, and all of these directional lines, the windrows from the compass. There are actually names written in Elvish on those that point to Valinor and Middle Earth and important locations.
Right.
This in the middle here, I love taking art from Tolkien because Tolkien was actually a phenomenal artist. He had a very unique style. And so this centerpiece on the compass is actually the center piece from his Great Seal of Numenor. And I bet and it's only about 1.5 inches in diameter, and recreating that, again, painting it with a piece of bone and natural pigments on buckskin and all that. There are probably 10 hours just in that, just to do that.
Nice.
The elven ship here is made up of several pieces of buckskin. It's one for the body, one for each oar.
So you're also attaching pieces of buckskin to the main surface.
Yeah, so cutting and burning and painting all of these, and this is a painting basically that Tolkien made of an elven ship, just trying to recreate it in three-dimensional.
What kind of paint are you using for this?
They're all natural pigments. I don't make them myself. That would be insane. I buy my pigments from earthpigments.com, and they come in powdered form like this. And this is vine black. Some of them are less natural. People think you say natural. People think, oh, you just went outside and grabbed some dirt. Some of them are more processed than others, especially the more vibrant colors like yellows and reds and blues. But they are all non-toxic, inert. So I'm not going to go sniffing them, but far, far, far safer to use than
the usual cadmiums and
yes,
other heavy metals that.
Right. Probably the riskiest ones are the mica dust, which I use for the metallic stuff. And if I pick one up, I don't know if I could tilt it enough to show the camera. I have to open this really carefully. But this is basically like, if people say that glitter is the herpes of the craft world, this is This is the Ebola of the
Micah's.
crafting. It just floats on its own, right? It'll
Right,
just like
yeah.
the slightest breeze, and you don't want to breathe
Because
mica
it's
dust.
flakes of rock that. Yeah.
Right. And it's kind of almost glass-ish, so you don't want to breathe that in. And what I do is I mix those colors with most of the time with just basic school glue and some water, just a couple of drops of each, and I can paint with it. And this is my brush, just a piece of bone, really. And if I'm going with a fully or more primitive project that I just want to go the extra mile, I do use the fluid from deer eyeballs. I haven't done that in a long time, but I used to have a hunter or butchers during the hunting season. I would go and I would actually take the eyes because they just throw them out, and the fluid from the vitriol, is it vitreous?
Vitreous fluid, yeah.
Yeah, from inside the eyeball is basically a medium for pigment, and it's been used a long
Well, when you mentioned
time ago.
glue, I was going to ask if you had, to keep it in the traditional theme, if you had tried out like a rabbit skin glue mixed with pigment.
I haven't. It's just kind of a pain.
Yeah.
To use. Yeah, I mean, I have rabbit skin glue. I have it's hide glue, right? And I've made hide glue before, and it's a pain. You got to keep the temperature correct, or it gets too thick, too thin, whatever, or burn even. It's a pain. And I am under no illusions that Elmer's glue is natural anymore. But there's a reason there's a cow on the logo.
Yeah, it's casein based, isn't it?
Probably, but I am of no illusions that it's as natural as it used to be a long time ago. But it's so much easier. Just a few drops of that. Thin it
You're
down.
already going to so much trouble to use
Oh,
all these
no.
things.
Wait, it's gelatin. That's what the cow, because it's the hooves, isn't it?
It's the same thing as in skin glue. It's the exact same stuff. When you boil skin, bones, whatever, you're getting gelatin. So rabbit skin glue is just gelatin. Why is rabbits better? I don't know. It's just somebody.
Rabbits, I don't know why. I just know they used it for furniture making.
Yeah.
And
some carpenter or medieval monk artist, whatever, just experimented laboriously to find out that rabbits make a.
They boiled down each type of animal they had access to.
Who knows? There's probably some quality that makes it.
So we were in a methods class long ago in college, back when we had a guy that really knew all the old stuff, and we did tons of different things, including working with like the old school lead white paint. But the rabbit skin, we got the pellets and melted it down, and I'm 90% sure that we took that and rubbed it into a what would basically have been like a burlap to make it a better canvas, and then painted on top of that with oil. So you're basically like
sealing it
and sealing it.
Yeah.
And
makes sense.
That was interesting.
Yeah, you make hide glue. You can use bones, hooves, skin, anything that has gelatin in it. Obviously, the less of other stuff like meat and fat, the better.
So if somebody wanted to get into this, where do they go to their nearest taxidermist and ask for?
Go to butchers during the hunting season. Or butchers anytime, really, because they have stuff. So just buy bones. You can buy hides during the hunting season from butchers, just the raw skins if you're talking deer. But yeah, you can just it's a bit of a process, but you can find instructions online, I'm sure. If anyone's got questions about things and about primitive skills, feel free to email me.
So when you said you used to teach, do you still do that?
Not for a long time. I will occasionally share things with friends. Post Dragon Con, when friends came over to my place, we have a fire, and I start the fire with a bow drill just because I like doing that. And I will try to teach anyone who wants to learn. But I used to teach primitive skills, doing workshops for various schools that taught them all over the country. Mostly I taught hide tanning and also how to use the whole animal.
Mhm.
Like I said, I chose to do the things nobody else wants to. So most schools around the country, surprisingly, did not have anyone who was an expert at tanning hides or anything like that. They usually would have the things their instructors would know how to, flint knap or make bows or whatever. All of these things that are cool, but the messy, nasty stuff, like working with skins, which actually isn't very nasty. It's just kind of a misconception people
Got a
have.
bad rap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, once
Uh,
the skin's already off.
right.
Yeah.
I would
I mean,
have.
even
Yeah.
cleaning. I'm a big hunter. I won't get too graphic, but cleaning just the skin is actually not a bloody work at
No,
all.
not at all.
It's fairly clean.
Yeah, and I would have hunters in my workshops who have hunted for decades and just finally getting around to learning how to use the hide, or I would have even primitive skills instructors who have been in that industry longer than I have been alive at the time, would come to learn finally how to do it, because it's kind of one of those skills that they left till the end, which to me was that's the first thing you should learn, in essence. One of the first things you should learn, because that's your clothing, right? If you're into it.
Yeah, well,
So
that's sort of society, right? And I think that we're
right,
enchanted by those things because it feels like a piece of our history. When you pulled out the bucket of pigment, I had flashbacks to my art days because we would learn. We always the same professor actually. We always had to learn the way the old masters did it, and
yeah,
it was sort of like learning to ride a horse so you knew why you drove a car. Uh, it it was so much more difficult. I mean, it would be sort of like if you were only ever a digital painter and
right.
decided suddenly you wanted to take on oil painting. I mean, Bruce is going through that, right? I mean, so you can
Accurate,
see,
yes.
yeah, so you
Now I
can
have
vouch
to
for it.
mix my pigments. Oh no.
Things just don't work the way you want them to work,
Yeah.
and so take
Right.
that back a couple hundred years, and then it's getting even worse. You have to make your own
Honestly,
brushes.
well, yeah. So and people ask me why I use a piece of bone, and because I'm lazy. I could make brushes, but brushes are a lot of time to make and a lot of maintenance. They don't last very long, especially as abusive as I am with my stuff. So it would just be so much work. I'd spend so much time just maintaining and making tools. Where this is basically like a stick, and I could use sticks. I have, but wood absorbs moisture, and so it doesn't last as long as a piece of bone. So that's the only reason I use this, is because I'm lazy. I have here, when you were talking about that, I remember that I had this stuck in the drawer down here. This is a piece of art. That's kind of hilarious. This is kind of a class photo from a workshop, using the whole animal workshop that I taught with a friend back in 2008, and it is painted very crudely, intentionally, to look kind of like a cave painting. You can even see the goat that we. This is the skin of that goat that's,
Yeah.
that's on there.
How's the good?
So
No.
it's the goat's fine. Yeah, she's
Okay.
we
Nice.
email back and forth over the years. Um, and so it was just like I painted this really quickly with as an example to the students, because they tan the hide. They didn't do a very good job, but that's fine because it's their first one. And we used pipestone dust and charcoal. The pipestone is the red, and the charcoal is the black is the charcoal. And I used a brush that we made out of a feather, very very quickly. It literally takes seconds, and so and I
So
painted that on there.
when you're, other than teaching, right? You talked a
Yeah,
lot about several commissions. This is a very fine art. I mean, for
thank you.
instance, when we talk about fine art, so oil paint's relatively approachable. You can go and buy everything you need to get oil paint at a Walmart if you want to. This isn't that, and it takes a lot more time. The curve's a lot higher, I'd say.
And what's the economics of
That's
all
what I
of
was going to
this?
ask. Is this a
So
very, very high commodity?
very high, but meaning the price of it.
A
Yes.
luxury,
I
not a commodity.
I wish.
Oh,
The
sorry,
opposite of a
luxury.
commodity.
The
I,
opposite. Yeah,
I
sorry.
wish. I mean, for me to do, or for people
The
to
luxury.
commission. For me to do it could essentially be free, because all the stuff I'm using is I can go outside and find it if I want to chase down a deer and tan the hide and all that. It does, as an artist, it does cost me perhaps a little bit more. The actual pigments are cheap. A jar of powder like this will last me. I mean, in 10 years, I think this might be maybe my third one of black, and black is probably the one I
Just an
use the most common.
essential, yeah.
Yeah, so it goes very, very far as pigments go. But the hides, the average map that I make ends up around 18 by 24 on a piece of hide, usually 20 by 30, something like that. So an 18 by 24 canvas will cost you, I don't know, a few bucks, right?
So I guess I was asking
Yeah.
about the consumer
Yeah.
side.
To me, it does end up translating into that a little bit, because the hide will cost me around $200, $250. So I can't make mistakes, not mistakes I can't paint over things a lot of times. So especially mistakes with the burning. So to the consumer, I wish. I unfortunately can't. What I learned, and we're kind of getting into that part of the conversation maybe. What I learned over the years is that if I actually charged a living wage per hour for all the hours that go into it, no one would be able to buy it. Right? If I charged 150 hours worth of, I don't know, even $30 an hour, which most fine artists will charge a lot more, right? I know. Maybe it's a separation that shouldn't exist, but comic artists. A lot of friends of mine who are professional comic artists, who for commissions, not even professional work, published work, but for commissions, they will charge $150 an hour, right? And they deserve it, and they should get it. And if I charge anywhere close to that, no one would be able to afford 150 times 150. So I would sell absolutely nothing, which is why I started making prints or figuring out how to make prints of my work and selling those.
I wouldn't say nobody. There's a very high chance you're the only person making deer hide Worlds of Tolkien.
I am the only one.
If you find the right celebrity that's really interested.
You would be limited to a very select clientele, let us say. It would not be the normal,
Yeah, and I wish I would have found a clientele. I really do. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And even the few celebrities that have seen my work at conventions or things like that, because that's where you run into them, generally, if they're over at a convention, most celebrities who are over at a convention signing autographs do it because they need the money. So you learn that over the years too. So yeah, it's not, it takes a very special person to even charge, I think most of my maps at around, I charge around $30 to $35 an hour, so it comes up to about between $3,000 and $5,000 for something that's roughly 2 feet by 3 feet, right? And if it was a fine art oil painting, it would be around that much or maybe more, right? So it depends on the artist and what they charge. So I don't have the name of Larry Elmore to charge $20,000 for my maps, but I also feel like most people see a map and they don't think of it as a fine art, which is why I was flattered when you said this is a highly fine art. It is fan art too, but it's highly fine art, and I'm very flattered for you to say that, because most people, I think, have this psychological separation where they look at it and they don't see a painting. Right? They see a map.
They see a design artifact.
Right.
This is one of those things where the craftsmanship is immediately noticeable. I think even to
as someone who's made maps. You've made maps for publishers.
I don't
right?
necessarily think it's because I've made maps. I think
no. My point is, you would know that publishers do not pay their map makers, their cartographers, as much as they do the cover artists, right?
Oh yeah, that's true.
The maps take as much work, if not more. Right? It is literally the thing that players will base their entire gaming experience on, right? In a fantasy world, and yet the cartographers do not get paid as much as
the budget doesn't match the level of painstaking detail that goes into this particular art.
There are, I can think of maybe a couple of artists that are cartographers, like Francesca Berald, who crossed that line.
Well, you were talking about, you're talking about publishers and you're talking about conventions. This feels like gallery work to me. Like it needs a
Thank you, but
showcase rather than.
I have had only one gallery out in Colorado, in Denver, who showcased my work for we had like one show, and then they had my work for several months afterwards, but that's it. I will say right off the bat that the biggest problem with stuff like that for me has been the copyright
Because
issues
it's fan art, yeah.
Well,
because it's technically fan art.
As an original, that shouldn't matter. You can make originals based on other characters.
Legally, that's an area we might not want to get into, but it's a problem for them because in order to display stuff, they needed to have the right licenses and all of that, and it kind of started treading in areas that most galleries do not want to trade in. They don't want to risk crossing those lines.
And for maps to have value to the average person, it has to be a callback to something that they'll actually recognize, right?
Yeah. I could make random maps out of my own head, but who would want them?
Well,
why?
That is true. I mean, I would say that the average person is not going to, the average gallery curator is not going to pick up something from, let's say, The Legend of Zelda. I think.
Yeah. To me, the reason I make maps, and later on in conventions when I started doing and seeing hundreds, if not thousands, of artists, you walk down an artist alley, and I've absolutely not a bad word to say about fan art. So please, I don't want anyone listening thinking that I think that I look down about fan art. My art is fan art, for the most part. But you walk down an artist alley, and what you see is dozens of portraits of characters from whatever, Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, it doesn't matter what IP it is. It's just walls of portraits or even full body shots, right? But it's all essentially the same thing. So, and then you're playing this game of, as an artist, you're playing this lottery of, will this person walking by like my Spider-Man doing this better than that guy's Spider-Man doing this? It's the same pose even, but our styles are slightly different. Will they like mine better? And will they like my portrait of Sam, from the Lord of the Rings, or that person's portrait? Whereas to me, when I make a map, the entire story and every single character is in there. So when you look at it, you're seeing all your favorite moments from that story, right? As you look around the map and explore it, you're actually experiencing the story again. So it's not just one character. I have done portraits, and they're really difficult to do. Let me tell you, mountains are so much easier than doing faces. So I love doing maps from that perspective because I'm offering people all of those portraits in one thing that isn't a portrait. It's all in their head. All I'm doing is drawing some triangles and some blue lines, and and that's it, right? And they have their entire story in there. So that's why I love maps. But people do look at maps as different from art or fine art.
Well, it's kind of like how people have these different kind of compartmentalizations, even for different types of painting, right? Like people think, oh, well, oil painting's the fancy stuff, and acrylics is the newcomer, and watercolors is what you did when you were a kid with like that little basic watercolor set.
Right.
And so, despite the fact that if you ask any painter, like, what's more difficult, it's watercolor by far compared to oils.
Well, actually,
there's a price premium involved with how people compartmentalize these things.
I'm just going to go in the other direction with what Kfir said. When you're comparing, like, let's say the pictures of Spider-Man, I can think of very few people, unless they're very hardcore fans, that would put an image of Spider-Man over their couch. That's changing more every day. I know we're on the internet where that's very popular.
Have we been going to the same conventions?
Yeah, gaming rooms are really popular. I know, but like this maps, especially on these buckskin with these wonderful textures, is something that the average person, I think, would be willing to put large over their.
It's more couch hangable than say Spawn or Spider-Man or something.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. There's definitely that. but then the average person can't afford fine art. They do,
Yes.
prints are a completely different thing, right? So people do buy my prints and they hang them up, and I love seeing that. But for the originals, it's also, there are some other logistical difficulties with these. The number one is, first of all, that hides are not rectangular. So it's certainly possible to cut them into a rectangle that'll fit even in a frame. Usually I don't like to frame the art, but mostly if somebody wants it contained, I recommend them putting it in a display case, like people would use for sports jerseys, or
So
Native American artifacts, things like that.
we get into
But hanging an actual, this sort of weird shape of a hide, that's more logistical difficulties than most people want to deal with. And the second thing is that traditional buckskin smells like smoke. The last step in the process of tanning hides is smoking the skins, and that's what gives them that golden yellow or brown color. And they will make your house smell like there's a campfire in there 24/7. You'll actually the smell will not go away. It will take, you can hang a hide outside for a few weeks, and the smell will lessen as it airs out. But in your house, the smell will not go away. You'll just get used to it and not smell it anymore. So I'm sure that Bruce has been to my place very recently, and he can tell you, walking into my apartment, he probably smells a campfire, and I don't smell it anymore.
So... in fact, you donated an extra suitcase to me when I was getting out of Dragon Con, and I got home and I opened the suitcase and I'm like, it smells like a campfire. It smells like Kfir's place.
I haven't had that experience, and we've got tons of deer mounts. I wonder if there's a difference there.
They're not smoked.
So why not?
So because there's no reason to.
Okay.
The smoking. So when you make buckskin, 60 seconds on making buckskin. Your deer mounts are not made of buckskin. So first of all, the name buckskin, in theory, is not named after the male deer, buck, but it's named after the bucking step of the process, which is when you soak the hide in lye. And to complicate matters even more, that step is optional. So it's just the white man's name for it.
Okay.
Right? So to make usable leather out of skins, humans had to, first of all, take a skin off an animal. Then they had to decide, they have to remove the meat and the fat, if any came off with the skin. If you skin an animal well and you do it patiently, barely any will come off with the hide. So it's not really a messy process, like you said before. And then you have to decide, do you want to keep the fur on or not? To make what's known as traditional buckskin, usually the hair was removed for various reasons. Deer hair just doesn't tend to stick on like other fur bears, like fox or coyote or things like that.
So
deer hair
shed.
Yeah, deer shed very easily. You can come up to a live deer and just yank hair off them fairly easily. And so I don't recommend trying though. So let's say you remove the hair. Now what happens to skin when it dries? Right? You can have a wet skin off an animal, cut a hole in it, put it over you as a poncho, right? But when it dries, it'll just turn stiff. And why does it turn stiff? riddle for everyone. Because it's full of glue, in essence, right? I'm oversimplifying things, but hide glue, collagen glue, is water soluble. So as long as it's wet, things are flexible and it doesn't bond anything together. But as soon as skin dries, even our skin, that collagen that's in there is bonding fibers together and sticking them together, which is why your calluses are dry and hard, right? So if you want to make rawhide, you just let skin dry, and there you go. You've got a rawhide chew toy for your dog, or you have a drum, or whatever you want to make out of it.
Right.
But if you want to wear it, you have to prevent that glue from bonding fibers together. And somewhere, at some point in time, probably in multiple places around the world, but who knows, we will never know, somebody discovered that introducing oils, fats, into the hide to some degree will enable you to prevent the glue from bonding the fibers together. Basically, you're lubing up all those fibers, microscopically speaking. And then if you keep moving the hide as the water dries out of it, but when it's dry, that's it, right? It's not gonna, the glue has no more chance. So I like to illustrate it by saying, if you took glue on, stuck it on your hand, right, smeared it on your hand and stuck your hands together and waited, your hands will get stuck together. If you put it on your hands and then kept moving your hands, as the glue dries, it'll get harder and harder to do, and maybe the glue will bond your hands together, but it won't be as strong of a bond. But if you took glue and then put some oil on top of that glue, right, and then you would be able to move your hands a lot faster and a lot freer, or more freely. And then, but when the moisture is dried out of the glue, when it's done all the bonding it can do, it hasn't actually bonded anything except to itself. So your hands will be free to separate. So the same thing happens with the fibers of the skin. So you do that traditionally using brains because it's just convenient. If you've hunted an animal, you have its hide, you also have the brains that came from it. But you can use other things like eggs or actual oil from vegetable oil. There are different things you have to do to it. You need to add emulsifiers. We won't get into it. But the last step in the process is the smoking, because when you've softened the hide and you have a soft, dry hide now, what happens if you wear it out in the rain? The glue has a second chance because now it's wet again, and as it's drying, it can bond things together. It won't be necessarily a very strong bond like a hide that hasn't ever been softened and the fibers haven't been like pulled away from each other and haven't been lubed, but it will turn stiff. Smoking is the closest thing in this process to actual magic, where, again, oversimplifying it, there are resins and aldehydes in the smoke that penetrate the skin and actually create microscopic, permanent chemical bridges between fibers, and don't ever allow them to actually stick together anymore. And so it's magic, and it's basically permanent. I have seen a pair of pants, of buckskin pants, that a gentleman who was doing Mountain Man reenactment. Those pants were 40 years old. The man has washed them in a washer with mild soaps, right? Because you don't want to completely strip out any oils, but mild soaps. He's washed them dozens of times over the years, and he's never they've lost all color. They're basically back to being this creamy white. There was no more brown or golden yellow, and they were still soft, right? He never once re-smoked them. So it's a permanent sort of spell that you cast on the hide. So there's no need for that with a taxidermy mount, because they just needed to be wet once, and they probably use glycerin or whatever it is that they used, so that it fits over the form, right, of the animal. But they don't expect you to be displaying it out in the rain or wearing it,
right?
So they don't need to account for that. So, but traditionally, you mostly made clothing out of it, so you don't want your clothing turning to armor.
I mean, leather armor, that does seem appropriate for our interest.
Right. With my art, in theory, I mean, again, I don't expect anyone to be displaying it outside. The water won't hurt the skin itself, but the colors, the paints are all water soluble, so that's probably not a good idea. Don't throw my originals into the wash. It's not going to end well. I tell people to just treat it like any other oil painting or something like that. Hang it away from the sunlight and in a dry area. If it is organic, perhaps more so than a canvas with oil paints on it.
People are always surprised by when I mention light fastness whenever I give them oil painting.
Even prints, you know what? It's kind of a lie. I will call it a lie. Even prints these days. I have a large format printer. I use some of the best papers there are, right? And I will have paper just laying there in a plastic bag in the dark, and you pull it out and it's oxidized and changed color, just blank paper. So
is it in a bag? I think that has to do with the magnetization of the bag over time. If it's like a poly bag, we had that happen.
Really?
Yeah, Todd, back when I worked.
Not always in the bags, but yeah.
Yeah, back when I worked for Todd Lockwood, we would have things that had been there for like, I don't know, 5 years, and you could actually see it when you took it out of the bag, that the imprint almost of certain
Huh.
pigments maybe just respond to static electricity more, and it's like the bag was lifting them off the paper. But I think that's more true for
Oh no, I'm talking about blank paper, just white that'll turn slightly tan as you like. Because I would be able to. So if I have two sheets of paper and one of them is sticking out a little bit,
Right,
right?
one of
I won't
them's
notice it
exposed.
looking at them. But as soon as if I move after we're talking a couple of
yeah.
years, I would move the top one off and I will see a line, a tan line basically, of just papers that have been blank and laying there. And these are Epson or Hahnemühle or whatever. So,
That makes
Right.
sense to me. But okay, the
but yeah, light does that. Um,
Light and
where were we?
oxygen.
I don't remember.
Well, so I was wanting to talk about the convention scene. So
Oh yeah.
I first met you at a convention. I think it was actually early 2020. A really small convention that was doing very poorly for us
Oh
called
right.
Panuga.
Yes. It
Um,
was like the last convention of 2020,
yeah.
I think, for me.
But I think since then you've gotten out of conventions. So I don't know. Can you? I feel like we don't usually hear the getting out of story. Like
This-
there's an amount of survivorship bias in terms of doing podcasts like these and talking about the convention game as an artist and how to
right.
be an independent and all that. But I was curious about like I don't know um the mathematics of it, like figuring out okay, like this is not working for me
Right.
and I need to make a move.
I'm happy to. So it's funny because I was on a couple of panels over the years of, artists, come to a panel to learn how to be an artist at conventions. And I was always, always took upon myself the responsibility of being the naysayer and being the one who will tell people the ugly truth that nobody told me. Because when I started, I actually didn't know any artists who did conventions. Um, and so I kind of went into it completely blind. So I don't want people to do that, and I don't want them to go in with rose-colored glasses either from artists that they see that made, had the best weekend of their career, and I can do that too. And then I don't get invited to those panels again because it's not fun for people to hear. So yeah, I started with convention, like I said, blind in 2015 because I was unemployed. I stopped teaching primitive skills and tanning hides because I hurt my back. So I was thinking, what else could I do? And a friend of mine who was just a convention goer, right, just a fan of whatever fantasy, sci-fi literature, and all of that, he would go to some convention. He said, "Hey, why don't you try to sell some of your art?" Because I was already doing a little bit of the art, and it's like, "Why don't you go and try and sell some at conventions?" So I invested, and that's the first point of math, right? I signed up for a convention which cost me, I think it was a Wizard World Philly. It was my first one, and I think the table cost $250, something like that. And I invested a few $100s more. I think it was around overall just to go to that first one probably cost me nearly $1,000
Sure.
because to invest
Sounds
in the
about like how much I spent on
yeah
my first convention
yeah
too. Yeah.
buy all the grid wall because at the time that's all I knew about. Like when you start looking into things, you run into the most common things people use, but that's not necessarily the best.
Yeah.
But it's also the cheapest. And so I bought grid wall to display my stuff because my stuff is bigger and heavier than your average print or canvas even. And buying some extra tables and little easels and all the stuff you need to go to a convention. At least the stuff I thought I needed. Certainly grew after that. And I actually broke even on all of that stuff at my first convention, which is rare. So I would tell pretty much anyone. The first thing a piece of advice I would tell people who want to do conventions is don't. The second piece of advice would be don't quit your day job, right? And the
Yes.
third piece of advice would
Yeah.
be don't. So, but go into it very sober. I've known people who went into it, just dove right in, quit their day job, invested a lot of money, and failed miserably, and went bankrupt, and so very quickly. And so it's not something you want to do, because the convention industry, the way it works is you generally, unless you're lucky and manage to score a table for an upcoming convention that's like a month away from now or a couple of months, you generally have to sign up 6 to 12 months ahead of time. Right?
Yeah.
Most of the time, the booths go like, Dragon Con, well, not for the art show, but vendors have to literally put down the thousands of dollars, depending on the size of their booth, on the Sunday of the show for next year, right? So, and who has that kind of cash? If you had a great convention, maybe you have that kind of cash on hand to just drop cash. Most of the time, you do that on credit cards. So if you want to do conventions full time, let's say, I don't even know how we would define full time, but let's say at least one convention a month.
Something like that, yeah.
Right? So 12 conventions a year. Let's round it down to 10 just to make the math easier. And the cost will be about, you'll probably agree with me, both of you, it's about $1,000 per convention for booth and travel, hotels, etc. Some conventions are far, far more expensive.
Right.
Like I said,
I fly to a lot of my conventions, so that's definitely a factor.
Bruce is about $1,500 for when he flies, I'd wager.
Yeah, it's I've estimated before that a typical convention, including the cost of merch sold in order to reach my break-even point, is probably more like around 2,000 to 2,500.
I was trying to
something like that.
But
that's not how much I was spending when I was just first starting out, right? Because I've upgraded to bigger booths, corner booths, and so on.
Yeah, so you may be upgrading to bigger booths, and you may be upgrading to more expensive paper for your merchandise and things like that. It's just better quality,
shipping stuff ahead, and so on. So prices have gone up.
And you may be getting tired of staying in dingy motels, so you get a more comfortable, quiet Airbnb that costs you a little bit more. Right? I'm not saying you're flying first class or that you're eating steak every night at a convention, but at a certain age you start getting tired of it. So of living like a student on ramen. So you start taking care of yourself better. But yeah, let's say 1,000. Even if it costs you as low as $1,000 per convention,
starting out,
right?
At 10
conventions a year,
and the like, yeah.
At 10 conventions a year, you have to put down $10,000 a year in advance. And when I say a year in advance, it's not so much a rolling thing. Some of it is, but it can be basically for all of my conventions in 2025. If I were to do them, I would already have to be signed up at this point of the year, right? So I don't have $10,000 to just like spare money, right? Most people don't. So you put it on credit cards. And it is the only product, because really what we are as consumers, as vendors or exhibitors at conventions, we are buying a product and we are spending the full amount, usually non-refundable, up to a year in advance without knowing what we're going to get, right? That really, when I realized that's something I try to really drill into the newcomers' minds, because like you're buying a product that you can't get a refund on, most likely, a year in advance, and not knowing if you'll make a single dollar back. You don't know what you're going to get. I have been at conventions that promise all sorts of things, as far as anywhere from the advertising that they're going to do and how many people they will have in the door, all the way down to the promises they make you for what they give you at your booth. And when you get there, you find that their reality is very different. Sometimes, right?
Conuga, for example, was probably my last unprofitable show, so it can definitely happen, right?
Right. Where they tell you they're going to have 10, 20, 30,000 people in the door, and they have 100 or 200 people in the door. I have been to conventions where there were more of us vendors than there were attendees. But do we get a refund if that's the case? Absolutely not. Can I call out Dragon Con? Dragon Con promised art show artists this year 8-foot tables. That was on the contract. You got 6-foot tables. Did you get a refund? No. right? They can apologize for it, and they'll say, "Oh, we're sorry. We'll make sure next year this mistake doesn't happen." But that doesn't help you this year.
They gave me another
Right.
6-foot table, so I got more than I
Right.
wanted.
Well, great, right? As far as that goes, that's a good solution, I suppose, if you have the room for it in your booth. So that's the thing. You're buying a product blind a year in advance, and you're spending a lot of money. You're investing a lot of money on credit, basically, most of the time. You may reach a point, if you do this a long enough time and you're successful enough, you may reach a point where you have that extra income and you can put it aside and not on credit. But I don't even know anyone who's able to do that.
I don't think,
So,
yeah, but you're framing it as if like, okay, you're ready to start conventions. I'm going to need $10,000 airfare and a couple hotels from you. It doesn't really work that way. I mean, you try one convention to test it out.
Well,
Two,
but
you throw
that's
three,
the point about
you
don't
know.
quit your day job,
don't quit your
right?
day
Yeah, don't
job.
quit your day job at
Like,
all.
start trying a few shows. I mean, because
Absolutely. I was getting to that.
2 years into doing conventions before I quit my day job to any degree, and
those were
I
still
knew
being
at that
buffered
point.
by commissions. So
Right. Yeah, and it was being buffered by freelance as well. Yeah.
So you're absolutely right, Alan. Do not quit your day job. It's for the people who want to jump in with 2 feet and off the deep end and go full time, because they go to a lot of conventions and they see all their friends or online, on Facebook, everyone is faking it till they're making it, right? And so you hear only success stories. It's rare to see an artist, and I know a few of them. There's a tendency from vendors and artists to just, every convention was an amazing success, right? And thank you to all my fans, all 3 of them who came to the table and bought something. But there are conventions that are that dead, where there are so few people that, so.
Or just the economics of the time. I mean, I can say, like, speaking of sharing both sides of the story, like, I mean, my convention career has been very successful and things are going well, but like for the second half of this year of conventions so far, the numbers have been down like 20 to 25% year on year, right? Like, it can definitely happen even if you have a very successful setup. And I'm not going to say that any of my shows have cost me money, like I said, in quite a while, since 2020 was the last one.
Lost you money.
Yeah,
they always cost you money.
Right, they cost you money. Yeah,
Right.
That it hasn't lost me any money. Like my shows are still quite profitable, but you do have to account for the fact that even if you've got things like working really smoothly, like there will be down years and there will be bumper years, and you can't necessarily predict ahead of time which is going to be which.
Right. So think about it this way. My bottom line for a convention, to know that I at least made some sort of a livelihood, right? And it's less than minimum wage, but my bottom line was, I need to break even on all the expenses and then make at least $100 a day in profit for every day from the moment I left home, because it's usually a day of travel on either end, if not 2 days of travel. So I have to make, if you got a day of travel on either end and 3 days of a convention, that's $500. Did I make $500 in cash above everything that it cost me? And then I know that I at least have something to take home and feed myself, right? It's still less than minimum wage, because when you count the hours, but it was my absolute bare minimum. Any show that did not make that never saw me again. And you know what? Sometimes you'll have just a bad year. I've had shows that were consistently extremely successful, where I make 4 to 5 times what my expenses are, and then suddenly on year number 6, and it's always a growth. Every year was a growth, and then suddenly you don't break even. And that's happened to me. That was in 2022, my last year of doing conventions, coming out of the pandemic and all that. And that brings me to something like the pandemic, where once you do step fully into this and take on those risks, and they're very big financial risks, something can happen like the pandemic that then leaves you hanging. Because now, the pandemic started in the beginning of a convention year, where I was paid off, or I paid for a bunch of conventions for 2020, and then suddenly they're all canceled. Only only one of those conventions offered a refund. And that was not one of the more expensive ones. So it would have been nice to get a refund from DragonCon for $3,000.
Right.
But no, it was one of the ones that only cost a handful of $500 for. So now you're stuck with this debt, and you're stuck with it for as long as that lasts, and that lasted at least a year, right? 2021, late 2021 is when things started
Yeah, it
really
was like
coming
a year
back.
year and a half of no shows.
And it depends on how safe you want it to be personally.
Right.
So a year and a half of no shows, and my income was not 100% from shows. I had some from commissions. I had a little bit from my Twitch channel. So I was actually doing in some ways better than many artists who 100% of their income came from conventions. So stuff like that will happen. You can't look back on the last 4 years and say, it's never going to happen.
Right.
It will happen, right? And literally the science says it is going to happen more and more frequently. So take that into account. Can you afford, really sit down and have a heart-to-heart with yourself of realistically, what if? If this happens again, what? And that's what happened to me, right? So I saw things were going to last a long time, and things. It's not like I was doing phenomenal before. I didn't have a cushion, right? Before, one of the traps, actually, to touch on what Alan said, where you try a convention and it goes, well, I've seen, and I want to warn people of falling into the trap of, well, I didn't do well at this one, the next one will be fine, right? That's a downward spiral, circling the drain, because don't sacrifice your rent money to sign up for the next convention, hoping that it's going to pay you back for both months.
You don't want to throw good money after bad if it turns out that it's going in that direction.
And I've seen people do that out of desperation.
Your own risk. I mean, I've probably mentioned Shark Tank on every show we do. You would be, if you're a fan of that show, you'd be dumbfounded at the amount of people that are like, I had an idea, so I quit my job, I mortgaged my house, and I borrowed $1 million, and now I'm deeply in debt, but I'm here hoping you're going to bail me out. I mean, over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And you would also be surprised how many of those people are making something between like $100,000, $500,000, $1 million a year in sales, but they're not profitable yet. I think the average small business, maybe every business, is not profitable for the first 3 to 5 years. And don't get me into restaurants; it can be worse.
Yeah.
I think that, a lot of times you can really plot that out. It's like, oh, maybe I need a sandwich shop here, or an antique shop here. But I guess we're sort of like the high rollers of betting. If we're talking about, the wagers we're making, is we spend a lot of money on the front end. We hope to get even more money on the back end.
There's no real way to plot it out.
Yeah, I mean, we still, I think, are able to plot it out. We can talk to peers, and we can have these rose-colored glasses sometimes about how good our art is or how it's going to match up. Like, oh, I'm also Donato Giancola. I can make a lot of money. But
you can see trends over several years too. But
I went to a small show here, and it's it's anecdotal evidence. But I met these guys. They were small press publishers. When I mean small press, I mean like real small press, and they never went to the big shows. They never went to didn't step foot in a Dragon Con, Gen Con. They basically lived out an RV half the year. They pulled their inventory behind them, and they went to all the small shows you can think of, just dotting around the country. And they were like wildly profitable because their costs were so incredibly low.
Right.
And they were making per convention what you and I would call just an absolute failure. I mean, but they would be doing they would spend like $500 for a whole show and then come out with $1,000. And, if we did that, we might think, yeah, I mean, I doubled my money, but I can't live off $500,
But they could, yeah.
But they can, because that's all they're doing.
Right. That's an excellent point. One of the first things you should do is look at your expenses in life, just your cost of living. And if you want to be an artist full time, realize that moving to somewhere cheap will make you money. right? On the back end, you'll eventually, like, it comes
Penny
back
saved
because
is a
you
penny
spend
earned.
less.
Well,
Yeah.
I'd call those guys like low risk betters,
Right.
right? As we might be the high risk betters.
Yeah. One of the things that I did actually, and it ended up not working because of the pandemic, but I used to live in New Jersey, and Jersey not only being a more expensive state than where I live right now, which is Georgia and Atlanta, um, it was also pretty much as far as you can go, without hitting water. So in order to travel to conventions, I was generally traveling farther.
Sure.
To any Midwest conventions. I wasn't the farthest I ever drove was to Denver for Denver Comic Con. But if it was any farther than that, I flew. But when the opportunity came up for me to move to Georgia, I actually looked at a map and I started calculating driving times to all the conventions that I usually did in a year. And it turned out that Atlanta, the general area of Atlanta, was so much closer to all of those conventions that I did, to most of them. Sure, it took me away from New York Comic Con that I did only once, and Rhode Island Comic Con, Boston Comic Con,
Sure.
but it put me so much closer to the
Other
majority
ones.
of my conventions.
Yeah.
It actually would have saved me 14 solid days of driving a year, right? Forget the expenses of 14 days of driving, which is a lot of money. I saw 2 weeks of my life back, right?
Right.
that I
right.
wasn't wasting on the road. And so it was a no-brainer decision. Unfortunately, a year after moving down here, the pandemic hit.
Right.
So just an unfortunate event. But yeah, think about where do you live? Can you move somewhere else? Having a partner that has a job that isn't such a high risk job, has income that isn't high risk.
Or if you don't
certainly
have
helps.
a partner, figure out how to live on the road like those guys Alan was talking about.
Exactly. Yeah.
Vagabond lifestyle.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I
There are
never
definitely
saw conventions as a main form of income. I mean, at Bruce's level, I think you probably could. But I always figured if that happened, it would just be something that happened. It was never a goal of mine. And
there's a subset of artists, if you more into fine art rather than fantasy. I'm separating the things, the artsy fartsy stuff,
Mhm.
not fantasy, that go to art shows and art fests. So it's definitely not the pop culture stuff. Who actually do it full time, and they are on the road, several months out of the year in an RV, and they travel, and and it's a lot of shows in Florida and the Southeast just because of the weather.
so the art
during
fairs, yeah.
during the fall and winter, and then they travel to the West and the Southwest it's weird. And they do it full time.
It's a
right?
lifestyle.
It's definitely a lifestyle. I did one outdoor art fest and met those people. I was the only one there who was kind of doing this sort of nerdy art, and it was very eye-opening to like, there's a whole culture of this that's happening, a whole complete different industry.
I had a teacher. You can look him up, Ron Kaler. He was in the MoMA for a while. He used to sculpt brushes. Your work actually reminds me of him because you have the small strokes of the different waves and landscapes. And he used to make styrofoam cups out of wood. And so he would sit there and needle out all the dots of the styrofoam.
God.
Crazy guy.
Wow.
Anyway, he would apply online to all these art shows and galleries around the country. And he told me once that he spent roughly because there's always a fee. He spent roughly $30,000 a year applying to shows, only got into like 30% of them. I don't know how many shows that amount to, and ended up making like over $100,000 a year. So I guess there is a little bit of the convention element to the fine art world there. So we bridged the whole gap. We got an art fairs, fine art.
One of the things for people to realize also is, then when you hear numbers from successful artists at conventions, take into account that overall, my experience and a lot of the people I've talked to, unless they're incredibly successful, they're going to actually take home at the end of the year maybe 30 to 40% of what they actually the gross during the year. The expenses are so high, signing up for conventions, traveling, all of that stuff, that you end up with not a whole lot. I don't mind sharing numbers. My best year was actually 2019, and it wasn't phenomenal. I made about a gross 90,000, I think, which sounds like a lot. It's an enormous amount of money.
Sure,
If you
but
gave me that
there's
amount of money now, I wouldn't know what to do with myself. But
the
I took home about 30,000, like after taxes and everything,
Yeah.
and all the expenses were calculated. So it is rough, and I worked enough hours to make a $90,000 salary.
Right.
So that was another nail in the coffin for me when I saw, okay, I worked enough for 90,000, but I only made a third of that. And then the debt and the risk, and there are non-mathematical elements in this equation where I don't know if you want to get into those, but I can certainly expound on those. And as artists, we are generally, it's been my experience that we are treated as second-class exhibitors. There are a lot of conventions out there who have basically discriminatory policies towards artists as opposed to regular exhibitors. You could have an exhibitor who is selling T-shirts or Funko Pops, and they will be treated policy, literally on paper, better than an artist. Whether it's the costs of the booths, usually artist costs are cheaper as far as booths go. But it's, for example, I'll give you one story. Don't know if you want me to mention the convention. I will say it afterwards if you want me to. A convention I exhibited at for 5 years straight. It was one of my most successful conventions. People would come looking for me. Obviously, my work is unique, so people would come looking for me every year. There was nobody else who did what I did. That convention that last year I did it, had 45 Funko Pop vendors. We made it a joke between ourselves. There's a few artists that I'm friends with that if we go to the same convention, we place bets
Right.
on how many Funko
many
Pops
are they going to be there this year?
whoever gets closest without going over. And there were 45 Funko Pop vendors on the floor. Only one of me. This convention had a designation for artists. They had Artist Alley, and then on the outskirts of Artist Alley, they had what they called featured artists, which were just 10 by 10 corner booths, and so which cost roughly $1,000. Literally right across the aisle from us were regular vendors with the same 10 by 10 corner booth footprint. At the end of the convention, this was a bad convention for me. I did not break even. It was the first one coming back from the pandemic. People weren't buying. I don't know. So I went up to the vendor coordinator, and which I knew by first name basis.
Right.
I've been there for 5 years now, and I said, look, I had a really bad year. I'm coming out of a year and a half of no conventions and no income. I can't afford. Their policy for artists was that you have to pay them in full for the next year. But their policy for the vendor that's literally across the aisle from me with the same footprint was just $100 deposit. Right? And I came up to him and I said, look, I had a really bad year. I've been here I'm a loyal customer of yours. Can I please, I cannot afford to take $1,000 of the little I made and give it to you right now for next year. If I do that, I can't pay rent. And so can I give you $100 as a deposit? And in 6 months, just like the same exact policy you have for the exhibitors, in 6 months, if I don't pay the difference, you get a free $100, right? You get to keep my deposit. And his response was no. I don't care. Right? I can't say that this was someone that I considered a friend, but an acquaintance and somebody that I've worked with, and we're on a first name basis, and I was a loyal customer. And that attitude is the attitude from the majority of conventions. There are diamonds in the rough out there where the people organizing them, convention promoters, I guess they're called, are good people that understand the burdens that being an exhibitor in general, not just an artist, they understand the risk, and they are nice, good people who treat you well.
Yeah, shout out to Planet City Comic Con.
But and that's fine. Yeah, shouting out the good ones is good. But I have found that overall, the general rule of thumb is that exhibitors are, first of all, like you said, the first to pay and last to earn. The convention makes their money before anyone walks in the door, right? They've made their money from ticket sales and from us funding it. Literally, we are vendor booths a year in advance to make the convention happen because they need that money in order to pay celebrities, in order to pay for marketing and all that. So they made their money, and we are the last to earn, and we might not. But they also treat us, especially artists, as second-class citizens. Other conventions, one very recent, where I was not an exhibitor or an artist anymore at, but I raised some questions about why artists were treated differently. And I was told not to raise those questions, right? I was told, because if artists are treated worse, because if the regular exhibitors found out that artists pay less for their tables, they would be up in arms. There's all this politics that go on. So I have a very low threshold for tolerating.
Yeah.
For what? What did you say?
Bullshittery.
Yes. I have a very low threshold for bullshittery, and I just can't take it. And I will cause, I will raise a storm about things, and I will be the squeaky wheel that then doesn't get the grease, just gets booted out and replaced. Right. And that's one of the things to realize again in the convention industry, that that you are meaningless to a convention unless you're a huge name that brings in so many fans to the convention. Right. And in artists, there are maybe a handful of those names, right?
Right. And in terms of Comic Cons, it's a handful of comic artists. The fantasy artists don't count.
Right. And even then,
comics people.
Even then, they are replaceable. Yeah. So us, as good as we might be as far as our art, and however many fans we have, we are nothing. We are meaningless. And for every artist that complains and says, I won't be back if you keep this up, there are dozens who will take our spot. And the convention knows that. So they're like, okay, bye. We will make our money on somebody else. And unfortunately, I've also seen the same behavior from vendors. Not so much artists. There's not to say that there aren't bad actors in the artist community, but I've seen it more from just your general flea market sort of vendor who sells whatever, where they will step over the dead bodies of their fellow vendors in order to get a spot and to ensure their better spot next year.
Right.
You hang around the convention circuit long enough, you'll see that behavior from people. So that's another thing that sort of, various coffins in the nail for me that made me look at things.
Raw.
Yeah, rubbed me raw. I was getting tired of it. And so when the pandemic eventually, kind of reached the point where we were coming back from it, and I looked at the sales and I looked at the debt that I incurred throughout the pandemic, to wrap this up, this long rant. And I just sat down and did the math, and I saw that not only will things have to go back to what they were pre-pandemic, which would take a while, and by a while will take several years, if ever, right? You just don't know. But not only will they have to go back to what they were for me sales-wise pre-pandemic, now I have all this extra debt, so now they have to get so much better to the point that I'm paying off this debt. So I looked at it realistically, and I'm like, that's just not going to happen. Mm-hmm. Or it's possible that it would, but mitigating risk, it's not likely to happen. So I initially wanted to keep maybe a couple of the conventions that were really successful and generally bigger, because that means bang for the buck. I guess I was getting more exposure. I would say that over the years, 90% of my commissions came from people who saw my stuff at conventions. Mm-hmm. My stuff is perhaps more of a tactile, like you really have to see it in person to understand what it is and get the wow, I want to hang this on my wall.
Yeah.
And so it's been one of my biggest challenges in how do you market my stuff online, right? And it's very different from just an oil painting. And so I wanted to keep the bigger conventions, 2 of them, just so that I still had that exposure. But even those just did not work out for those non-mathematical reasons that I talked about.
Right.
So yeah, I decided to pivot my career. I started taking classes and things to just move into other fields. I still take commissions. I still stream on Twitch. Twitch has been a blessing. I love the community of the Twitch art in general, or the artists on Twitch in general. And I've made some very, very close personal friends in real life from Twitch. And I have regulars who come to my stream that have been coming since almost day one, and they still show up 7, almost 8 years later. It doesn't make me really almost any money at this point. If we want to talk about numbers, at my most popular, most successful as a Twitch, as a streamer on Twitch, I maybe would make $300 to $400 a month. That did not last long. It kind of comes and goes, and it's certainly been on a downtrend, not just for me, but for a lot of people over the last few years because of the pandemic and just kind of.
You ever make instructional videos about your?
No. I've been asked. I share. I mean, I share it for free when I stream on Twitch. Somebody comes in and asks me a question about what I do, I will happily share exactly how I do it. I have not done instructional videos because there's probably a reason why I'm the only one who does it. Right? The number of people.
How they're teaching it.
Well, I think the number of people who would want to do it is low, and then the bar for entry, as far as financially, is actually a little high because, like I said, a hide will cost you $200,
Mm-hmm.
and a piece of paper to paint or draw on will cost you pennies.
Expensive hobby if someone wants to take it up.
Right, it's an expensive hobby to just pick up, and so I don't see.
A lot of hobbies are expensive.
Yeah, I don't see it being something that instructional videos would make me a significant income that's worth mentioning.
Yeah, you'd have to frame it a certain way. You couldn't say how to make fantasy maps out of buckskin. It'd have to be little things like ancient techniques taught by the old.
You know what? If you want to be my agent and get me to do stuff like that, we can.
No,
talk.
I was just thinking you're talking about forms of income and like I did a Udemy back. I didn't catch on to it at the high time during the pandemic, but I did one of those, and I was talking to Bruce. Was it Bruce? Like maybe 3 hours total or something. It was a little portrait, and it really wasn't that well done. I made like $1,000, and then Udemy put a cap on, I guess, their advertisement of it. I never really made much more than that. But then it got me thinking. I was like, I could sell like 20 of these.
Right, you could do a bunch and then kind of have them cross-promote each other.
Yeah.
So, like, to put it more in Kfir's context, maybe if you broke down the different lessons, right? You've got a whole bunch of things that go into what you do. And
there's so many.
Like, okay, well, maybe you're interested in knowing about, pigments and how I work with them, or maybe you're interested in pyrography, or so on.
No, it's
I'm not trying to give you advice. It's just something that I think
I get
cool.
it. I will say probably the biggest reason why I haven't done it is I think before we went live today, you asked Bruce if he wants to edit the the podcast, right? So, and Bruce was an emphatic no, right? So, editing videos it takes longer. I have done some maps. Let me see. Do I have the Skyrim map here? We can move this.
It's also why I didn't make those other 10 videos.
This is a 17th century replica. I replicated a 17th century star maps. And so that's a couple of them. That's Westeros, Witcher, blah blah blah. I'm skipping. I don't know where Skyrim is. I don't have Skyrim, but in the photos. But I made the map of Skyrim. Probably took me, I don't know, 80 to 100 hours to make that map of Skyrim. And I actually, while I was doing it, I had my phone set up to take a time lapse because I'm not working with Photoshop that can actually record it for me, right, or anything on the computer. So I was recording taking time lapse photos with my phone. every few seconds. And over 100 hours, that ends up with tens of thousands of photos. And then I had to go through all of those photos manually to delete the ones that weren't in focus because I was moving my hand, because whatever.
Sure.
Then delete the ones where, because I was streaming or whatever, delete the ones that I wasn't working at all, right? And there was no, because I took a pee break or whatever. Often I maybe forgot to turn the camera back on. If I remembered to pause it, I forgot to turn it back on. So then you're missing part. Anyway, to edit all of that into a video that is just a couple of minutes long took longer than making the actual map. So I was like, no, that's it. It's my last one. I'm not doing that ever again. It's a nightmare. If I knew somebody who edited videos, and enjoyed doing it and wanted to do it for the fun of it, or at least maybe trade for some art, because I certainly I wouldn't want to do it for free, but I also can't afford to pay them. So it's not easy work. So it's just a ton of work. So when I'm faced with the prospect of creating a lesson plan and then filming it and all that, it's just like, oh my god,
entry.
I could spend those hours making a new piece of art, or I could spend it doing something fun, like sitting in a tub full of scissors. So it's hard, right? We all know how it. We running a small business, being a freelance artist, you have to wear so many hats, and the last ones you're thinking of that you even want to deal with is posting on Instagram or and Twitter and TikTok and Facebook, and to, on top of that, sit myself down and do a instructional video that I'm already like, just come ask me questions. I'm okay with that.
No, I mean, that's fun.
I would say
I've got a 2-hour limit on the amount of download I can, or whatever. I don't know why they put a 2-hour limit on it, but
on the meeting.
Yeah, so we're about the 10-minute mark. So if there's any final questions Bruce had, or
this has been fun.
Anything? Yeah, it's our longest one we've done.
Really? Well, I hope you edit it and cut it down.
I won't.
you watch me.
He does not want to, and neither do I.
I'll just say in the first hour, there's this. Second hour, there's this. I might do a 2-part. Who knows?
Yeah, we could break it up into 2.
I don't know. Do you guys have any questions?
Well, going forward, what's gonna be next? What's coming up?
I am still looking for my new direction in life. I recently did a Kickstarter. It's completely separate from my art. It's for Dungeons and Dragons supplement. It's a cookbook on how to cook monsters called Flavor Text Adventures. We actually published it on a monthly basis from 2019 until 2022, or trying on a monthly basis. And it's basically the life stories or the memoirs and recipes of Chef Alton Green, who's a halfling that is an expert at cooking monsters. And every chapter focused on a single monster, and Alton would tell you the story of his encounter with that monster, which is usually hilarious. And then a real-life recipe with photo instructions that you can cook at home with a substitute in case you can't find unicorn meat at the local Kroger. And then in-game material for, what does it do to your character when your D&D character eats a unicorn, or magic items or NPCs or maps or whatever we could pull from the story.
Mm-hmm.
It was usually kind of short and sweet, little bundles. Every chapter was only 10 pages. And so the Kickstarter finally, after a few years, just did a Kickstarter for a physical book of volume 1, just 8 recipes. It doesn't sound like a lot, but 8 recipes translates into 100 pages. So because you have those 3 sections of stories and recipes and game content.
Right.
So that was successful. The books were actually printed. I got an email from the printer yesterday with a video of the books. So they're on their way to me, hopefully. And I'm kind of tentatively planning on publishing volume 2 and 3, and maybe bringing it back into actual live production, where not live as it, but publishing more new stuff.
Where'd you get
other than that, I'm sorry. Oh, where did I get it printed? A company. It's in China. It's a company called Qin Printing, QIN.
Yep.
Printing. It's kind of a gamble so far because I could not find really many reviews. I found a couple of things on Reddit, people asking about them. But so far it's been good. They've been communicating well. The proofs that they send me were great. They caught some problems with our files when we sent it to them, so they didn't just blindly go and print what we sent them. So they came back to us with like, hey, this is a problem, fix it. So, and the book and the video looks fantastic. So I'm excited to get the books.
Nice.
If I get them and it all works smoothly, and the shipping was great, then I will shout their names from the rooftops. And the price was really, really, really nice. It was cheaper than
always up.
Most.
We did back when I worked for Todd, and even I've been looking for some things for print projects I want to do, and printing in America needs to get its shit together. I know it's a supply line issue and a healthcare issue and all sorts of issues, but it is it's unapproachable. It's wildly
absolutely. And not only that, when I was looking at what I wanted a really quality book. It was more like a bucket list thing for me. Like I want good quality, and I wanted a ribbon bookmark, and I wanted
something that you can be proud of.
Yeah. Something I can be proud of. And it wasn't available in the U.S. You could not make that in the U.S. There's one company, I forget their name. When I went on their website and they tout that they print in the U.S. When I added those features to the book, it immediately went to their UK printers, which added an enormous amount in shipping. So I'm like, all right, well, I guess I can't do it. I wish I could, but I just couldn't do it in the U.S.
Yeah, I've been looking for things like that. But
I'll happily send you their website. I think it is
chinprinting.com. We worked for the guy called On the Mark. He was sort of a go-between between a printer. That was a nice experience. I'll call him out, but I didn't personally. I mean, I worked with him 100% of the time, but it wasn't my money; it was Todd's money. So
right.
I can't.
It's scary when you're publishing a book and you're doing it, overseas. The printing overseas, it's scary because it's a gamble. We can. Cobalt Press just had a big, not their fault, fiasco with books with an extremely successful $2 million Kickstarter or something like that, right? And thousands of books got damaged.
Wow.
And
there's never through the whole. I can tell you right now, through the whole process, the only contract we had was that the books would be delivered in full.
Right. There's no.
When you look back on that, it's like, okay, is there any insurance involved with this? Like, let's say the Cobalt Press thing. Like, it's possible the Chinese company might be like, okay, well, we'll redo it in like 4 years.
Right. But even if there is insurance, it's going to take months or years, and your customers are really unhappy.
I don't even think they'll let you insure it. To be honest. But anyway,
we can do a part 3.
We still got to get to. I always pick up on things at the end. We still have to do a whole thing where Steven and I just debate art school. So,
Steven?
Nigerian.
Oh.
Yeah, right at the last.
He's got some great rants on the subject.
How he hated art school, and I'm fine with art school. So that said, the art school I went to, which it was just closed, so maybe I'm not the right answer.
I would be happy to come back and talk about other things, publishing, working as on the other side of that equation of being a project manager or director of a project of a book, and hiring artists and all of that.
That's something we have. We can have more than 3 people on here, Bruce. We should get 10 people on here and have
I know.
Bring opinions.
The more
and I know
people there
I have a lot of I have a lot of friends in the small publisher community. So if you wanted to just get a publisher on there, we can do that too. So no problem.
Well, it was good talking to you.
You too, Alan, Bruce. Happy to be back anytime. If anyone wants to find me, cavegeekart.com.
cavegeekart.com.
Or flavortextadventures.com. So
both sound really cool.
All right.
You
You two have a great weekend.
Yeah, well, we
too.
got to do some closing notes. Next time we're
Sure.
here, we've got an artist that we met at Dragon Con that is looking sort of the opposite of Kfir. So we thought that would be a nice dichotomy. He's trying to break into the convention and fantasy market from the fine art market. And it's, yeah, we're going to have him on.
Who was it?
Ron, I'm mixing up his last name real fast. Let me grab it. If you want to look him up, I mean, I hate to shout out anyone but Kfir, but it is
You met him
No,
briefly
please.
when he came by to say hi at my booth.
Oh, I
Ron,
did. Oh, wow.
Ron Sanders. His art's really portraiture mostly and landscapes, but his new fantasy stuff's really cool. We're gonna have him on. We've already got that scheduled. It's like 2 weeks from now. That'll be
Sweet.
fun. And then we're setting up some things. I've actually, since you're talking about publishers, I've got some writers that reached out to me and writers I work for that were interested in seeing, talking about both sides of the equation there. Not sure if that's a good idea. We're going to think more about it. Anyway, great talking to you. And we'll see everybody
Writers.
next time.
All right. Have a great weekend.